Charitamrita, Lord Chaitanya instructs Rupa Goswami that the living entities wander in life after life, undergoing the miserable conditions of material existence. But when one is very anxious to get free from the material entanglement, he gets enlightenment through a spiritual master and Krishna. This means that Krishna, as the Supersoul, is seated within the heart of the living entity. And when the living entity is serious, the Lord directs him to take shelter of his representative, a bona fide spiritual master, directed from within and guided externally by the spiritual master. One attains the path of Krishna consciousness, which is the way out of the material clutches. Therefore, there is no possibility of one's being situated in his own position unless he is blessed by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Unless he is enlightened with the supreme knowledge, one has to undergo the severe penalties of the hard struggle for existence in the material nature. The spiritual master is therefore the mercy manifestation of the Supreme Person. The conditioned soul has to take direct instruction from the spiritual master, and thus he gradually becomes enlightened to the path of Krishna consciousness. The seed of Krishna consciousness is sown within the heart of the conditioned soul, and when one hears instruction from the spiritual master, the seed fructifies and one's life is blessed. Fallen into a pool of blood, stool and urine within the abdomen of his mother, his own body scorched by the mother's gastric fire, the embodied soul, anxious to get out, counts his months and prays, "O my Lord, when shall I, a wretched soul, be released from this confinement?" Purport: the precarious condition of the living entity within the womb of his mother is described here. On one side of where the child is floating is the heat of gastric fire, and on the other side are urine, stool, blood, and discharges. After 7 months, the child who has regained his consciousness feels the horrible condition of his existence and prays to the Lord. Counting the months until his release, he becomes greatly anxious to get out of the confinement. The so-called civilized man does not take account of this horrible condition of life, and sometimes, for the purpose of sense gratification, he tries to kill the child by methods of contraception or abortion. Unserious about the horrible condition in the womb, such persons continue in materialism, grossly misusing the chants of the human form of life. The word Krishna is significant in this verse. Dhi means intelligence, and Krishna means miserly. Conditioned life is for persons who are of miserly intelligence or who do not properly utilize their intelligence. In the human form of life, the intelligence is developed, and one has to utilize that developed intelligence to get out of the cycle of birth and death. One who does not do so is a miser, just like a person who has immense wealth but does not utilize it, keeping it simply to see. A person who does not actually utilize this human intelligence to get out of the clutches of māyā, the cycle of birth and death, is accepted as miserly. The exact opposite of miserly is udara, very magnanimous. A brahmana is called udara because he utilizes his human intelligence for spiritual realization. He uses that intelligence to preach Krishna consciousness for the benefit of the public, and therefore he is magnanimous. My dear Lord, by your causeless mercy, I am awakened to consciousness, although I am only 10 months old. For this causeless mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the friend of all fallen souls, there's no way to express my gratitude but to pray with folded hands. As stated in Bhagavad Gita, intelligence and forgetfulness are both supplied by the Supersoul sitting with the individual soul within the body. When he sees that a conditioned soul is very serious about getting out of the clutches of the material influence, the Supreme Lord gives intelligence internally as Supersoul and externally as the spiritual master, or as an incarnation of the personality of God in himself. He helps by speaking instructions such as Bhagavad Gita. The Lord is always seeking the opportunity to reclaim the fallen souls to his abode, the kingdom of God. We should always feel very much obliged to this personality of Godhead, for he is always anxious to bring us into the happy condition of eternal life. There is no sufficient means to repay the personality of Godhead for his act of benediction. Therefore, we can simply feel gratitude and pray to the Lord with folded hands. This prayer of the child in the womb may be questioned by some atheistic people. How can a child pray in such a nice way in the womb of his mother? Everything is possible by the grace of the Lord. The child is put into such a precarious condition externally, but internally he is the same and the Lord is there. By the transcendental energy of the Lord, everything is possible. The living entity in another type of body sees only by instinct. He knows only the agreeable and disagreeable sense perceptions of that particular body. But I have a body in which I can control my senses and can understand my destination. Therefore, I offer my respectful obeisances to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, by whom I have been blessed with this body, and by whose grace I can see him within and without. Purport: the evolutionary process of different types of bodies is something like that of a fructifying flower. Just as there are different stages in the growth of a flower, the bud stage, the blooming stage, and the full-fledged, fully grown stage of aroma and beauty, there are 8,400,000 species of bodies in gradual evolution, and there is a systematic progress from the lower species of life to the higher. The human form of life is supposed to be the highest, for it offers consciousness for getting out of the clutches of birth and death. The fortunate child in the womb of his mother realizes his superior position and is thereby distinguished from other bodies. Animals in bodies lower than that of the human being are conscious only as far as their bodily distress and happiness are concerned. They cannot think of more than their bodily necessities of life: eating, sleeping, mating, defending. But in the human form of life, by the grace of God, the consciousness is so developed that a man can evaluate his exceptional position and thus realize the self and the Supreme Lord. The word Dhamma Shariri means that we have a body in which we can control the senses and mind. Dhamma Shariri. The complication of materialistic life is due to an uncontrolled mind and uncontrolled senses. One should feel grateful to the Supreme Personality of Godhead for having obtained such a nice human form of body, and one should properly utilize it. The distinction between an animal and a man is that the animal cannot control himself and has no sense of decency, whereas the human being has the sense of decency and can control himself. If this controlling power is not exhibited by the human being, then he is no better than an animal. By controlling the senses or by the process of yoga regulation, one can understand the position of his self, the super-self, super-soul, the world and their interrelation. Everything is possible by controlling the senses. Everything is possible by controlling the senses. Otherwise, we are no better than animals. Real self-realization by means of controlling the senses is explained herein. One should try to see the Supreme Personality of Godhead and one's own self also. To think oneself the same as the Supreme is not self-realization. Here it is clearly explained that the Supreme Lord is Anadi or Purana, and he has no other cause. The living entity is born of the Supreme Godhead as part and parcel. It is confirmed in the Brahma Samhita, Anadir, Adir, Govinda. Govinda, the Supreme Person, has no cause. He is unborn, but the living entity is born of him. As confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, mahā-mantra, both the living entity and the Supreme Lord are unborn. But it has to be understood that the supreme cause of the part and parcel is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Brahma Samhita therefore says that everything has come from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sarva Karana Karanam. The Vedanta Sutra confirms this also, Janmad Yasya Yataha. The Absolute Truth is the original source of everyone's birth. Krishna also says in Bhagavad Gita, Aham Sarvasya Prabhava, I am the source of birth of everything, including Brahma and Lord Shiva and the living entities. This is self-realization. One should know that he is under the control of the Supreme Lord and not think that he is fully independent. Otherwise, why should he be put into conditional life? 20. Therefore, my Lord, although I am living in a terrible condition, I do not wish to depart from my mother's abdomen to fall again into the blind well of materialistic life. Your external energy, called Deva Maya, at once captures the newly born child, and immediately false identification, which is the beginning of the cycle of continual birth and death, begins. As long as the child is within the womb of the mother, he is very precarious. He is in a very precarious and horrible condition of life. But the benefit is that he revives pure consciousness of his relationship with the Supreme Lord and prays for deliverance. But once he is outside the abdomen, when a child is born, the Māyā, or the illusory energy, is so strong that he is immediately overpowered into considering his body to be his self. Māyā means illusion, or that which is actually not. In the material world, everyone is identifying with his body. This false egoistic consciousness of I am this body at once develops after the child comes out of the womb. The mother and other relatives are awaiting the child, and as soon as he is born, the mother feeds him, and everyone takes care of him. The living entity soon forgets his position and becomes entangled in bodily relationships. The entire material existence is entangled in this bodily conception of life. Real knowledge means to develop the consciousness of I am this body, I am spirit soul. I am not this body, I am spirit soul, an eternal part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. Real knowledge entails renunciation or non-acceptance of this body as the self. By the influence of Māyā, the external energy, one forgets everything just after birth. Therefore, the child is praying that he prefers to remain within the womb rather than come out. It is said that Shukadeva Goswami, on this consideration, remained for 16 years within the womb of his mother. He did not want to be entangled in false bodily identification. After cultivating such knowledge within the womb of his mother, he came out at the end of 16 years and immediately left home so that he might not be captured by the influence of Māyā. The influence of Māyā is also explained in Bhagavad Gita as insurmountable. But insurmountable Māyā can be overcome simply by Krishna consciousness. This is also confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 7.14. Mam eva ye prapadyante mayam etam tarantite. Whoever surrenders unto the lotus feet of Krishna can get out of this false conception of life. By the influence of Māyā only, one forgets his eternal relationship with Krishna and identifies himself with his body and the byproducts of the body, namely wife, children, society, friendship, and love. Thus he becomes a victim of the influence of Māyā. And his materialistic life of continued birth and death becomes still more stringent. Becomes more stringent. Where does that word come from? It's sort of onomatopoeic. It sounds austere and...
Hare Kṛṣṇa. It's an adjective of regulations, requirements, or conditions, strict, precise, and exacting. Origin is mid-17th century, from Latin, stringent, drawing tight, from the verb stringere.
Stringere.
Stringere. Sounds Italian. That's all it says in the Oxford Dictionary. Drawing tight.
Drawing tight. Thus he becomes a victim of the influence of Maya, and his materialism of continued birth and death becomes still more stringent. You don't want that. Huh?
Like tied up in strings?
Yeah. It's like you have no freedom whatsoever. It's tied up tight by the material nature. Therefore, without being agitated anymore, I shall deliver myself from the darkness of nescience with the help of my friend, clear consciousness. Simply by keeping the lotus feet of Lord Viṣṇu in my mind, I shall be saved from entering into the wombs of many mothers for repeated birth and death. The miseries of material existence begin from the very day when the spirit soul takes shelter in the ovum and sperm of the mother and father. They continue after he is born from the womb, and then they are further prolonged. We do not know where the suffering ends. It does not end, however, by one's changing his body. The change of body is taking place at every moment, but that does not mean that we are improving from the fetal condition of life to a more comfortable condition. The best thing is, therefore, to develop Krishna consciousness. It is stated here, upasadita Viṣṇu pada. This means realization of Krishna consciousness. One who is intelligent by the grace of the Lord. This means realization of Krishna consciousness. One who is intelligent by the grace of the Lord and develops Krishna consciousness is successful in his life, because simply by keeping himself in Krishna consciousness, he will be saved from the repetition of birth and death. The child prays that it is better to remain within the womb of darkness and be constantly absorbed in Krishna consciousness than to get out and again fall a victim of the illusory energy. The illusory energy acts within the abdomen as well as outside the abdomen. But the trick is that one should remain Krishna conscious. And then the effect of such a horrible condition cannot act unfavorably upon him. In Bhagavad Gita it is said that one's intelligence is his friend, and the same intelligence can also be his enemy. Here also the same idea is repeated. Suridatmanaiva, friendly intelligence. Absorption of intelligence in the personal service of Krishna and full consciousness of Krishna always are the path of self-realization and liberation. Without being unnecessarily agitated, if we take to the process of Krishna consciousness by constantly chanting Hare Kṛṣṇa, Hare Kṛṣṇa, Kṛṣṇa Kṛṣṇa, Hare Hare, Hare Rāma, Hare Rāma, Rāma Rāma, Hare Hare, the cycle of birth and death can be stopped for good. It may be questioned herein how the child can be fully Krishna conscious within the womb of the mother without any paraphernalia with which to execute Krishna consciousness. It is not necessary to arrange for paraphernalia to worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead Viṣṇu. The child wants to remain within the womb of its mother and at the same time wants to become free from the clutches of Māyā. One does not need any material arrangement to cultivate Krishna consciousness. One can cultivate Krishna consciousness anywhere and everywhere, provided he can always think of Krishna. The mahā-mantra, Hare Kṛṣṇa, Hare Kṛṣṇa, Kṛṣṇa Kṛṣṇa, Hare Hare, Hare Rāma, Hare Rāma, Rāma Rāma, Hare Hare, can be chanted even within the abdomen of one's mother. One can chant while sleeping, while working, while imprisoned in the womb, or while outside. In this Krishna consciousness cannot be checked in any circumstance. The conclusion of the child's prayer is, let me remain in this condition. Although it is very miserable, it is better not to fall a victim to Māyā again by going outside. Lord Kapila continued, the 10-month-old living entity has these desires even while in the womb. But while he thus extols the Lord, the wind that helps parturition, could look it up. parturition. Postpartum. Parturition.
Noun, formal or technical. The action of giving birth to young. Childbirth. The weeks following parturition. Origin, mid-17th century, from late Latin. Partritio, from parturire, be in labor.
Lord Kapila continued, the 10-month-old living entity has these desires even while in the womb. But while he thus extols the Lord, the wind that helps parturition propels him forth with his face turned downward so that he may be born. Pushed downward all of a sudden by the wind, the child comes out with great trouble, head downward, breathless and deprived of memory due to severe agony. The word Kṛṣṇa means with great difficulty. When the child comes out of the abdomen through the narrow passage, due to pressure there, the breathing system completely stops. And due to agony, the child loses his memory. Sometimes the trouble is so severe that the child comes out dead or almost dead. One can imagine what the pangs of birth are like. The child remains for 10 months in that horrible condition within the abdomen, and at the end of 10 months, he is forcibly pushed out. In Bhagavad Gita, the Lord points out that a person who is serious about advancement in spiritual consciousness should always consider the 4 pangs of birth, death, disease, and old age. Pangs. The materialist advances in many ways, but he is unable to stop these 4 principles of suffering inherent in material existence. The child thus falls on the ground smeared with stool and blood and plays just like a worm germinated from the stool. He loses his superior knowledge and cries under the spell of Maya. After coming out of the abdomen, the child is given to the care of persons who are unable to understand what he wants, and thus he is nursed by such persons. Unable to refuse whatever is given him, he falls into undesirable circumstances. Within the abdomen of the mother, the nourishment of the child was being carried on by nature's own arrangement. The atmosphere within the abdomen was not at all pleasing, but as far as the child's feeding was concerned, it was being properly done by the laws of nature. But upon coming out of the abdomen, the child falls into a different atmosphere. He wants to eat one thing, but something else is given to him because no one knows his actual demand. And he cannot refuse the undesirables given to him. Sometimes the child cries for the mother's breast, but because the nurse thinks that it is due to pain within his stomach that he is crying, she supplies him with some bitter medicine. The child does not want it, but he cannot refuse it. He is put in very awkward circumstances, and the suffering continues. Laid down on a foul bed infested with sweat and germs, the poor child is incapable of scratching his body to get relief from his itching sensation, to say nothing of sitting up, standing, or even moving. It should be noted that the child is born crying and suffering. After birth, the same suffering continues, and he cries. Because he is disturbed by the germs in his foul bed, which is contaminated by his urine and stool, the poor child continues to cry. He is unable to take any remedial measure for his relief. In his helpless condition, gnats, mosquitoes, bugs, and other germs bite the baby, whose skin is tender, just as smaller worms bite a big worm. The child, deprived of his wisdom, cries bitterly. The word vigata jnanam means that the spiritual knowledge which the child developed in the abdomen is already lost to the spell of Maya. Owing to various kinds of disturbances and to being out of the abdomen, the child cannot remember what he was thinking of for his salvation. It is assumed that even if a person acquires some spiritually uplifting knowledge, circumstantially he is prone to forget it. Not only children, but also elderly persons should be very careful to protect their sense of Krishna consciousness and avoid unfavorable circumstances so that they may not forget their prime duty. In this way, the child passes through his childhood, suffering different kinds of distress, and attains boyhood. In boyhood, also, he suffers pain over desires to get things he can never achieve. And thus, due to ignorance, he becomes angry and sorry. From birth to the end of 5 years of age is called childhood. After 5 years, up to the end of the 15th year, is called Pauganda. At 16 years of age, youth begins. The distresses of childhood are already explained, but when the child attains boyhood, he is enrolled in a school which he does not like. He wants to play, but he is forced to go to school and study and take responsibility for passing examinations. Another kind of distress is that he wants to get some things with which to play, but circumstances may be such that he is not able to attain them, and he thus becomes aggrieved and feels pain. In one word, what to speak of youth? In one word, he is unhappy. Even in his boyhood, just as he was unhappy in his childhood. What to speak of youth? Boys are apt to create so many artificial demands for playing, and when they do not attain satisfaction, they become furious with anger, and the result is suffering. With the growth of the body, the living entity, in order to vanquish his soul, increases his false prestige and anger, and thereby creates enmity towards similarly lusty people. The living entity is eternal, but because of his accepting non-permanent things, misidentifying his interest, he is put into ignorance, and therefore he suffers material pangs. For the sake of the body, which is a source of constant trouble to him, and which follows him because he is bound by ties of ignorance and fruit of activities, he performs various actions which cause him to be subjected to repeated birth and death. In Bhagavad Gita it is said that one has to work to satisfy Yajna or Viṣṇu. For any work done without the purpose of satisfying the Supreme Personality of Godhead is a cause of bondage. In the conditioned state, a living entity, accepting his body as himself, forgets his eternal relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead and acts on the interest of his body. He takes the body as himself, his bodily expansions as his kinsman, and the land from which his body is born as worshipable. In this way, he performs all sorts of misconceived activities, which lead to his perpetual bondage in repetition of birth and death in various species. In modern civilization, the so-called social, national, and government leaders mislead people more and more under the bodily conception of life, with the result that all the leaders with their followers are gliding down to hellish conditions, birth after birth. An example is given in Srimad Bhagavatam, Andayatander Upaniyamana. When a blind man leads several other blind men, the result is that all of them fall down in a ditch. This is actually happening. There are many leaders to lead the ignorant public, but because every one of them is bewildered by the bodily conception of life, there is no peace and prosperity in human society. So-called yogis who perform various bodily feats are also in the same category as such ignorant people, because the Hatha Yoga system is especially recommended for persons who are grossly implicated in the bodily conception. The conclusion is that as long as one is fixed in the bodily conception, he has to suffer birth and death. Okay, now, Mahendra Prabhu.
In several places, Srila Prabhupada said that Maya is insurmountable, so powerful, but at the same time it's very easily overcome by surrendering. What is the reason that we seemingly devotees, we surrender, and for many years we...
The reason that devotees what?
The reason that even after devotees seemingly they are surrendered, still they are prone to the temptations of Maya.
Maybe they should surrender a little more.
So
what do you think?
That's the reason. Insufficient surrender or not complete.
Sweet surrender. It's sweet surrender. It's so hard to maintain the false ego and the bodily conception of life, and it just seems like the most fortunate situation if one gets it within his or her mind and heart that I'm going to surrender to Krishna. And then the Bhagavad Gita at the Sarvadharman Parityāja verse. Remember that one?
Yeah.
Prabhupada says, one should be attracted. Krishna himself is the most perfect transcendentalist. In other words, devotional service to Krishna in full consciousness is the most confidential part of knowledge, and this is the essence of the whole Bhagavad Gita. Karma yogis, empiric philosophers, mystics, and devotees are all called transcendentalists. But one who is a pure devotee is the best of all. The particular words used here are masucha, don't fear, don't hesitate, don't worry, are very significant. One may be perplexed as how one can give up all kinds of religious forms and simply surrender unto Krishna, but such worry is useless. Do one another on the outside people's party? Yes.
In the purport to text 27, it says toward the end, not only children but also elderly persons should be very careful to protect their sense of Krishna consciousness and avoid unfavorable circumstances so that they may not forget their prime duty. And this is in context of how the child, because of the misery, the agony, he forgot everything. So my question is, how can one, what is really meant here? What kind of unfavorable circumstances? Because many times a person may be put into some very difficult, painful circumstance which actually really could cause this loss of memory because of the agony. So how can he, sometimes he cannot avoid it. Or what is really meant here in this purport?
It's meant that the devotee shouldn't take any chances, should remain strictly following Krishna consciousness every day, not take anything for granted, and even as one grows older, one should become even more prepared, because we're getting closer to death and anything can happen. So there's no external circumstance that can hinder someone who has decided they're going to be Krishna conscious. We can make that clear decision, and when there are obstacles, a person with that determination within his or her heart finds that the challenging situations are opportunities to prove their devotion to Krishna. And although at first there may be some sense of wonderment or more like bewilderment why certain things are happening, devotees who are fortified by their decision and also who keep themselves close to good association will find that the reversals aren't necessarily, or the obstacles, or even one's own missteps are not detrimental, but they become the pillars to one's success in Krishna consciousness. So it really just means that in any situation of life, there's an opportunity to either become Krishna consciousness, become Krishna conscious, or to be distracted by Maya. So we should be very careful and take advantage of all the circumstances. For instance, there's near temples, there are morning and evening programs, and one might think, oh, I'll just cut this out, I'll cut that out. But then what is one doing instead? And usually one fades away, and it looks like they suddenly went away. But the fade, we should fear the fade. This fade means a little bit at a time, one little degree at a time. There's a sense of either entitlement, that, oh, I've already done it so much before, I don't have to do it again today. And the next thing is one notices that, oh, I'm not doing it at all. Oh, that's all right. I've built up so much from before. So if one doesn't allow oneself a sense of entitlement, has a beginner's mindset that says, of all people, I need this more than anybody, and stays in the process, then amazing things can happen. So young, old, middle-aged, teenage, whatever it may be, everyone has an opportunity as a soul to make a decision to become Krishna conscious. Prabhupada Priya.
Hare Krishna. Several verses back, I was reminded about how when I was a kid, I grew up in a small town, and my father was in the VFD, the Volunteer Fire Department, and so they had to be prepared with their boots and their jackets and all that. And any time of the day or night, that siren goes off, and they have to jump in their boots and go down to the station and go, put out a fire. So. There was a squad for that. There's the driver, there's the people that man the hose, there's the people with the fireproof suit that go in the burning building and rescue the kids from the second floor, and there's the guy at headquarters. So I was just thinking that we're hearing about how when a soul becomes anxious, about their material situation and how bad it is, and they want to know God, and they become anxious for self-realization, then that's kind of like the fire alarm that the super soul hears, and then he mobilizes his squad on a rescue mission. That's like the gurus, sadhus, shastras, sadhus bringing shastras, like the book distributors, and so many teachers and mentors and gurus that all just come rushing in to save that soul. That's kind of like the picture I got when we were reading those verses, that Super Soul's like, this is it, guys, let's go. The opportunity. There's a sense of urgency that we have to act, now that we have to act on this. And we've all experienced it. We've all experienced it as soon as we had that, the little jiva here in the womb, he's like, please help me. We've all had that. We were hearing a nice, very heart-touching story of Devavrata the other day, how everything, and we've all, as soon as we have the desire to know God, to get closer, to know ourselves as souls, then everything, that rescue squad just comes imperceptibly, but very powerfully to the rescue, and saves us from the blazing forest fire of material existence.
Thank you for the extended metaphor. It's very appropriate. And Benjamin Franklin started that volunteer fire department. And one of his famous sayings is, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And also, he didn't say it, Thomas Paine said it, but the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. So going to that idea that one should be vigilant, otherwise you can lose your freedom. And you're like, what happened to me? I wasn't vigilant. Kind of like people talk about political systems. You have to be vigilant, otherwise you could just slip away. It can happen any time. Anandachirta Prabhu.
Yeah, I was just finding this really fascinating that, the living entity is able to make such profound praise to the Lord. And it also states that, without any paraphernalia, and Prabhupada writes in the purport that under any circumstances you can always remember the Lord. So I have two things in the sense that where does then association fit here, number one, and number two is that is it only because of the impact of the living entity coming out? What the living entity is speaking here is like a self-realized soul. So can we call it a self-realized soul? And a self-realized soul, if you call it like that, then is it just the impact of coming out of the womb that makes him forget?
Well, self-realized soul and one aware of one's situation may be slightly different. In other words, there's as I mentioned it earlier, as a liminal state when one may come to a sense of awareness about one's existential situation, especially in the womb. In the 11th canto, in the teachings of Hamsa to the four Kumaras, the Hamsa incarnation of the Lord describes how the senses of the human being or any being that's created are embedded in their objects. The objects are embedded in the mind, and one's senses are embedded in their objects in the sense that they have this immediate connection. So when the child comes out of the womb, inside the womb, senses are still internalized, and that's what makes it possible for that liminal state. So the child can be aware of what's going on because senses are still internalized. But when it comes out, then each sense then becomes connected to its object. That's part of the overwhelming experience of the soul coming out into the material world. Senses becoming externalized, and we feel it. We can feel it at any time. Our senses are always pulling in different directions, and if you try to internalize your vision, you'll notice that it's struggle, because senses are always going out and out and out. And to objectify what's actually happening takes a little thoughtfulness and consideration. But that living entity who comes barreling out of the birth channel into the world, and then everything grabs him, including the sense objects, and then he becomes totally absorbed in that and overwhelmed by it. What to speak of the extreme jet lag from traveling. You know what it feels like to have jet lag just traveling here, right? Imagine if you're traveling from another planet or something as a jiva. That's why babies sleep so much. They have extreme jet lag. Have you ever seen them? They're sleeping all the time. They wake up like, now I'm hungry, now I'm sleeping. That's, if you ever had jet lag, it's like, I just eat, now I'll sleep. Because it's half joking, but it's that traveling soul going into a new body, new environment, everything reorganizing itself, and the senses just clamped on to their objects immediately and externalized. So it's very difficult to get out of unless there's intervention. Māyā mukta jivera nahi, swata Krishna gyan, jivera Krishna koila Krishna Veda Puran. It's not swata or automatic, says Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Sanatana Goswami, the soul comes out of that trance. There's got to be knowledge intervention so that he is able to use his human intelligence to develop a sense of, oh, I'm not this body. I'm an eternal servant of Krishna and so forth. But I didn't understand the first question.
Yeah, I mean, the first question was about association. So those devotees who, um, I mean, we stress so much on association. So if you are in a circumstances where, you're not able to get physical association and things like that, or devotees generally complain you are not able to come to the temple and this and that. So how do you, can we say that, tell them that, look, you can be Krishna conscious under any circumstances? So is it an excuse that people generally make, or what is it like, I'm asking this question both from a preacher's side and also from the person who is, at the receiving.
Well, I mean, from the side of someone who's, not that I preach very much, but I'm just saying, from the perspective of a preacher, such a person is always thinking how to extend association to people, because that's the main thing. If you can make an environment where they feel safe to walk in, so preachers are always thinking, how can I make an inviting situation where they'll just come in and be around the devotees? And that can happen even online. We know from the pandemic, everyone had, at least I had more association than I've ever had in my life when we were all locked down, plus more service too. So there's no hindrance from that point of view. And people become, anybody who has a little bit of desire can take advantage of those types of association. And if they're sincere, Krishna will make an arrangement so that they'll get the association. There are miraculous stories about people who are sincere.
Okay, let me ask it in a different way that I made it more articulated, that there are people who probably don't want to come, because sometimes in the ISKCON temple they are very, devotees are very pushy about so many things. So I have a group of people who say that, okay, we don't want to come so often, because they push them for so many things, for initiation, for this, for that, for yatras. They want to read Prabhupada's books, so, but at the same time they don't want to get too much involved in the organization.
Well, I've found...
Can this verse be an encouraging thing? Can somebody use this as an encouraging factor?
Can somebody do what?
Can this aspect of this verse and this thing, that under any circumstances and without any paraphernalia, someone can remember and practice one's Krishna consciousness, can this be used in that circumstances to preach and to tell them and to encourage them?
Yeah, sure. I think it's important to be thoughtful and accommodate people so that they can feel comfortable. One of the most effective ways that people get association is going to other people's homes. If you invite people over, they're used to that, because that's why people get houses in the first place, so they can invite their friends over and relatives and sit there and have a little something. And then if you do the same thing in Krishna consciousness, I've seen so many different little sanghas where people feel at home. Whereas if they went into the temple, they would feel overwhelmed. So it's pretty much common knowledge nowadays with preachers. I know in the West, anybody who knows about how to cultivate Westerners, for example, knows that you can't just bring them to the Sunday program. That's kind of, it's just way overwhelming to them, and even if they say this is very nice, they'll never come back. Or it's very rare they will. But if you have a custom-made environment for them where they can come and be around people who are in a similar mindset, similar age, and they feel that they're very welcome there and nobody's pushing them for anything except for just be here and have a little prasadam and whatever, they come back again and again, and then it's very natural for them to become Krishna conscious. Patita Pavana, and then we'll take a break. And we have one online. Huh? Paragarangi, okay.
I just appreciated this statement.
Keep that close.
I appreciated the statement in the verse 21. Srila Prabhupada said, absorption of intelligence in the personal service of Krishna, and full consciousness of Krishna, always, are the path of self-realization and liberation, without being unnecessarily agitated if we take to the process of Krishna consciousness by constantly chanting Hare Kṛṣṇa, Hare Kṛṣṇa, Kṛṣṇa Kṛṣṇa, Hare Hare, Hare Rāma, Hare Rāma, Rāma Rāma, Hare Hare. The cycle of birth and death can be stopped for good. And then I wondered what is being unnecessarily agitated?
Being unnecessarily agitated?
Yeah, what does that mean to be?
Can you give it in context?
It says, without being unnecessarily agitated, if we take to the process of Krishna consciousness by constantly chanting Hare Kṛṣṇa.
What was I already talking about?
About making the program simple so that people can accept it from wherever they're at. Sorry. Yeah, it's already what Vaishesika...
We didn't want to reveal this part of it.
No, what Vaishesika Prabhu said before, that when Krishna consciousness is, when we make it easy for people to come from wherever they're at and don't push them into a situation that may be a sensory overload for them, perhaps that's what Prabhupada's speaking about there.
I mean, agitation doesn't sound good anyway. And unnecessary agitation, it almost sounds redundant, like agitation is not wanted and it's unnecessary in the first place. Well, the way I'm hearing it now when I'm just saying it is, it's a simple process. I mean, I'm trying to channel Prabhupada's language and the way he says things. Unnecessary agitation. You don't have to do, and maybe this is what you're saying, Bonnie. You don't have to do anything fancy. It's simple. Be friendly, be nice to people, feed them prasadam, and chant a little Hare Kṛṣṇa, read a half a purport, and discuss it. And next thing you know, people feel that this is high-minded, the people are friendly, and the food is fantastic, and I'm going to come back, and I'll bring somebody with me. So unnecessary agitation means you don't have to agitate your mind for anything outside of Hare Kṛṣṇa, Hare Kṛṣṇa, Kṛṣṇa Kṛṣṇa, Hare Hare. It's a simple thing. Just do the simple thing and it'll work. Now we'll just take a little cow break and come back here at... When would you like to come back? What? You want to stay here? Okay, we'll take a little break. Come back in 10 minutes. Let's come back at... Huh? Say what?
You said 10 minutes.
In 10 minutes, what time would that be? 5:22. We'll see you back here at 5:22. Thanks, everybody. More Bhagavatam coming right up. Don't you worry. Don't be unnecessarily agitated.